Hey everybody, this is Mike Egnor from the West Virginia Division of Air Quality. I'm here to talk about the history of air pollution. I have a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering from West Virginia Tech. I have a master's degree in engineering from Marshall University Graduate College. I have in the past taught chemistry at Bridge Valley Community and Technical College and a variety of engineering classes at Marshall University Graduate College. So we're talking about the history of air pollution. The things we're going to talk about is ancient history, pre-industrial revolution, industrial revolution, and recent disasters. So the first question is, how far do we go back to talk about man-made air pollution? Do we talk about burning wood? Do we talk about burning coal? Do we talk about living in caves? How far do you want to go back? We can go back as far as you would want. But let's start with early tribes. Early tribes burned fires inside their homes, which produce smoke. The smoke is caused from incomplete combustion. If you don't get enough oxygen, you get carbon monoxide, and you get some other things. When you burn wood, you generate ash, which is smoke, and it's not good. You've got odors because people would keep their animals, they would keep their food, they would keep their vegetables, they would keep their waste inside their dwellings. So one of the first inventions was a chimney. Let's burn wood in the chimney, that way the smoke goes out the top. Novel idea. Improvement of sanitation. Let's use the bathroom out of our dwellings and outhouses or other areas. Now they still have problems with that to this day. Bombay still has sewers that run down the middle of the streets. So even today we have human sanitation issues. We jump to a picture of what looks like a teepee. You see the smoke coming out of it. You see the inside of it. So before we had the chimney, the smoke would roll out this. As you know, smoke rises, so all the smoke would fill up and fall to the bottom before it came out, before the introduction of the chimney. Smoke hole caverns. Where did smoke hole get its name? Well, it's thought that smoke hole got its name from the presence of smoke stains on the roof, which could have been caused from Indian campfires. Makes sense. So we skip over to Rome. Seneca said, as soon as I got out of the heavy air of Rome, and from the smell of the smoky chimneys thereof, I felt an alteration in my disposition. What's that mean? His lungs felt a lot better from getting away from the smoke. In 1157, burning wood in the castle, King Henry II of England ended up causing his wife Eleanor to move out because the air was unendurable. Now, I don't know if he did that on purpose, or whether it was just something that she just couldn't deal with. In 1273, English Parliament passed a law that said don't burn peat while we were in session, burn coal. What's peat? Peat is peat moss. Peat moss is a step below coal and BTUs. That's a acronym for British Thermal Units. So the higher the BTU value, the more heat you get from it. You burn a pound of coal, you get more heat and less smoke than a pound of peat moss. So burning more peat moss causes more smoke, and it fills up the area everywhere. So they switched from peat to coal. Coal didn't help that much. In 1306, Elizabeth barred the burning of coal in London when Parliament was in session. So you can see way back when the government took care of their people first. In 1661, a brochure was submitted to help fix the air. This might have been the first air quality proposal. So we look at pre-industrial revolution. What were we doing before the industrial revolution? Major industries were metallurgy. Metallurgy is when you take different metals and melt them down to purify them to make things like bronze, brass, different alloys. Ceramics, they could make clay, they could make china. Preservation of animal products. Tanning hides to make clothes or to smoke meats would qualify. So the Industrial Revolution, which we give a lot of credit to Henry Ford, but it was Fulton who developed the steam engine. Industrial Revolution brought the ability to harness steam to provide power to pump water and move machinery in the early 18th century or 1700s. So think about how you make steam. How do you make steam? You have to boil water. How do you boil water? You have to burn fuel, usually coal or sometimes oil. You think about locomotives. That's a good example of them throwing the coal in the boiler house to make that steam, which in turn turns the engines to make it move. In the 1800s, the primary air pollution problems were smoke and ash from coal and oil burning. Stationary power plants. We still have those same problems now with coal-fired power plants, but they have much better air pollution control devices. Locomotives and marine vessels. At the DEP, we do not regulate mobile sources. We don't regulate planes, trains, or automobiles. That's done on a federal level. Home heating, fireplaces, and furnaces. If you've ever been in a valley when somebody's burning wood in their chimney, you could see the smoke waft its way throughout the valley. Again, we don't regulate that because people sometimes all they have to keep themselves warm is to burn wood in their fireplace. In 1819, pressure was put on Parliament of Great Britain to appoint committees to consider how far people using steam engines and furnaces could work them in a manner less prejudicial to public health and comfort, meaning we don't want this in our backyard. How far can we move them away so that we don't have this big smoke buildup where we are at in Parliament? The committee expressed the ability of smoke prevention, but as usual, nothing was done. Committees don't get much done. 2 Acts of Parliament enacted in the 1800s allowed police in London to enforce provisions against smoke from furnaces. Public baths. Well, they had to heat up the water because they liked their hot baths. They would burn wood or coal or peat moss. Wash houses and furnaces used in the working of steam vessels on the Thames, not the Thames, the Thames. This might have been some of the first air enforcement regulations. Smoke and ash abatement in Great Britain considered a health agency responsibility. And we passed some public health acts. Air pollution from the chemical industry was separated. This is the first time they looked at the chemicals that were being put into the air aside from smoke. Now to the United States. In the United States, air pollution control, or smoke abatement, because that was the big deal back then, was considered municipal. Why was it considered municipal? Well, you don't have the same issues in Kansas that you do in New York. In New York, you have concentrated areas of people burning wood, coal or wood, and which produces a lot of smoke. You had a lot of different factories that would produce smoke, as opposed to Kansas, where it's less, it's more rural. You've got less people congested together. Now think of Boston with their shipyards. They've got all these marine vessels coming in. All those different areas had different issues, so they considered it a municipal responsibility. At that time, there were no federal or state smoke laws in effect. The first municipal or city ordinances and regulations limited the emissions of black smoke and ash in the 1880s. It was directed towards mobile sources, industrial, and industrial, instead of domestic sources. Again, we didn't want to keep people from burning fuel to keep warm. The technology developments that happened: a stoker for mechanical firing of coal. What's a stoker? Well, if you've ever seen any movies, you see the guy with a handkerchief around his neck. He's got a shovel and he's shoveling coal into the boiler to make it go. It's not exactly the most efficient way to have it done. If you put too much coal in, you get incomplete combustion and you get more smoke. You don't put enough coal in, you don't get enough heat to make it work properly. So stoker is just a mechanical device that it's an automatic feed that relays the coal into the boiler. They used scrubbers for removing acid gases from the effluent. So one of the problems with acid gases that gets into the air is it causes acid rain that we'll talk about in a different series. So scrubber is like being in a shower and those droplets just fall down and catch onto those acid gases and it falls out to the bottom. They use cyclones and baghouses as dust collectors. A cyclone, they spin the air around and around and around and around. The heavy stuff like the dust falls out the bottom. They put that in a landfill. For a baghouse, it's just like a vacuum cleaner bag. They pass the air through it. The particulate matter gets caught in the filters and the clean air goes out the back. We started using natural gas and electric generated from natural gas as fuel sources, which is much cleaner than coal and oil. But again, some of that electricity is made from coal, so the offset of using your electric cars depends on where does the electricity come from. We thought about inventing stacks. This is in Ontario. This stack is 1/3 of a mile tall. Why is it 1/3 of a mile tall? If you get it high enough and the material comes out the top, then it starts to dissipate or become less concentrated, and also not drop completely down to the ground, but go down wind and then just spread apart. Was the idea. So we're hoping to get it that high. By the time they reach the ground, it's going to be diluted. The Industrial Revolution talked about the beginnings of chemical climatology. They used acid rain for the first time. Acid rain, again, we'll talk about in a different series. He studied the rain composition around Manchester, saw 3 different types of rain. That with carbonate or ammonia in the fields at a distance, sulfuric acid, acidic rain, and acidic sulfate in the town. 3 different types. So, some of the recent disasters, and I guess recent is a relative term. The first modern air pollution disaster occurred in Belgium. It was in a river valley and densely populated, highly industrialized. It was during the winter with a high barometric pressure and a thermal trapping inversion with warm air trapping colder air near the ground. I'm going to tell you in a couple slides what inversion means. So what happened? Here are the sources of air pollution. Coking operations. What's coking? That's where they get coal. They have to concentrate it because they need a higher fuel or BTU value. They use coke to make steel. To make steel, you need very, 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 very hot temperatures. Followed by, right there it is, the steel plants to make that steel. 3 metallurgical factories. Metallurgical means to melt down different metals besides steel. And you can see the list of the other ones. Transportation, railroads, trucks, and automobiles. And they use coal to heat their homes. As a result, 63 people died, mostly the elderly. So one of the things that we've learned is that the young, the old, the sick were more likely to die from events than younger, healthier people. Sore throats, getting smoke in their lungs, shortness of breath, smoke fills up the lungs, coughing, vomiting, etc. When you see cattle, birds, and rats die, you know it's not a good sign. There wasn't much news coverage about it. Nobody heard about this place in Belgium. The pollutants included SO2 and SO4, which is sulfuric acid. And this professor said if such an event actually happened in London, there could be a possibility of 32 sudden deaths. So I want to make a note of that. This happened in, when did this happen? 1930s. And he predicted if in London 3,200 deaths. So let's see how that prediction pays off. Alright, we were talking about a temperature inversion. A temperature inversion really means that you have warm air that rises, and then you get to this warm air layer, and then it gets trapped. It can't expand, it can't dilute, it just gets stuck. If you look on this graph, you see the temperature rising, it gets cooler, and then you have this inversion layer where it starts to get warm again. Where that relates to is you're in this valley, you've got this inversion layer, so all the smoke and other materials get caught down at ground level. That's a temperature inversion. So now we go to Donora, Pennsylvania. We had another incident in Donora. It was an industrial town, population of 14,000, steep hills, temperature inversion. This is going to start sounding familiar. It had stable air, which means it's stuck. It had fog, and it lasted around 4.5 days. Where were the sources? Steel plants. Sound familiar? A zinc plant, electric power plant. Here are some pictures. You see the smoke coming out. These could be from the houses, but these stacks here are definitely from the steel mills. And we're looking from top down. You see the river behind it with the mountains around it that's going to trap all that air in Donora, Pennsylvania. So on October 26th, the fog closed over Donora that morning. There was less sunlight hitting the earth, so it was blocking the sun. The weather was raw, cloudy, and dead calm. It remained that way. 2 days later, it stiffened into a clot of smoke. During the afternoon, it was just barely possible to see across the street. That doesn't sound good. So here's a picture. Here's what it looked like after. Okay, so you're having trouble seeing the mountains in the background. This is at noon. At noon in Donora. They've got the streetlights on. The cars aren't going anywhere because they can't see. Not sure what model car that is. The air had a sickening smell and a sickening taste. Everybody noticed it, but we're used to it. It's happened before. Not this bad, but it's happened before. $6,000 people became ill. 20 people died. They called in the U.S. Public Health Service. First time that they recognized air pollution as a potential public health problem. If it happened today, the news medias would all have trucks taking pictures of it. Mexico, 1950. They had a single source, one source, crude oil, with a lot of sulfur in it. Now, sulfur is common in oil and in coal. Different parts of the country have different percentages, 3%, 2%, 5% of sulfur. When you burn that material, the sulfur gets in the air, forms sulfur acids, acid rain. So the contaminant here was hydrogen sulfide. Had a flare. What's a flare? A flare is like an uncontrolled heat source. If you just see flames shooting out the top of it, it's used to, no matter what comes into it, the chemical is broken down into water, carbon dioxide, the simpler things than complex chemicals. There was an inversion in the valley. Inversion. There were 22 deaths, 320 people hospitalized of all ages. 1952, remember my prediction? Not well, it wasn't mine. The Great London Smog. There was a cold front. They were burning soft coal. Soft coal, that's in between peat moss and regular coal. They had factories, they had power plants, they had temperature inversion. 5 days of the worst smog they've ever seen. Public transportation stopped. They could not see where they were going. Indoor concerts had to be canceled because the people in the seats couldn't see the people on the stage. Can you imagine that? Going to a concert and you can't even see the people on stage? So here's some pictures. They had masks. This is during the day. You see the street lights on. You see public transportation not being able to go anywhere because they can't see the people in front of them. Here's some more buses that tried to get through before they were shut down, and people with stuff around their faces because they didn't want to breathe it in. 4,000 deaths. Let's see where our prediction was. Prediction said in the 1930s that if it had happened in London, there would be 3,200 deaths. There were 4,000 deaths. Mostly young and elderly. Again, our sensitive population. It occurred between December 5th and 9th in 1952. And it caused hypoxia. Hypoxia is when you have low oxygen in your blood because the smoke fills up your lungs. You can't get the oxygen from the air in. And lung infections from the holes in your lungs being trapped with particulate matter. Here's a graph that shows the level of smoke, the level of sulfur dioxide, and the number of deaths. So this is not a lingering issue like carcinogenic effects. This is immediately the spike in smoke, the spike in sulfur dioxide, the spike in deaths. Let's move to Italy. On July 10th of 1976, north of Milan, the valve broke at a chemical plant. A cloud of, I'm not even going to read that. We call it dioxin. Traveled southwest through Seveso through Milan, and it was a contaminant of herbicide. Here is a big fancy picture of dioxin. Dioxin is very potent in very small quantities. When we regulate the chemical industry for dioxin, it's usually 99.9999 or one more 9% removal. It is nasty stuff. 38,000 people exposed. 4% of the farm animals dropped dead. They killed the rest of them. Why? Why would they kill the rest of them? Would you want to eat the meat ingested or inhaled by these animals that had dioxin in them? They had to. The Italian government didn't respond, and it's still being researched, however many years later. Bhopal, India. So in 1984, Union Carbide wanted to expand. They made a product called 7, which was a pesticide, herbicide for crops. They wanted to expand in India so that the farmers could buy this material and use it and grow better crops without worries of insects. One of the enamary products was methyl isocyanate, MIC. MIC is an irritant to the lungs, causes edema, fluid, In the 1970s, Carbide built a factory there in India to sell those pesticides. Problem was, the Indian farmers couldn't afford to buy it, so they stopped the production in the early 1980s. And they left 60 tons of MIC in 3 vessels, just sitting there. December 3rd, 1984, 27 tons of the MIC began to leak. There were 5 or 6 different safety systems designed to contain it or to treat it, but they didn't. Here are some of the different control devices. One of them is a vent gas scrubber. So if the gas was leaking, they could have used those water droplets to catch on, but it was turned off. There was a water curtain. Shoots water up in the air to catch it. It wasn't high enough to catch it. A flare tower. That would have been best. Send this material to a flare. It's going to burn it off. It's going to turn it from MIC back into carbon dioxide and water and other things that aren't harmful. The storage tanks themselves, water leaked into them. The problem with water in MIC is it causes it to runaway heat producing reaction. Now, you might say, if water's bad, what about the scrubber? What about this curtain? Well, the curtain's a last ditch effort. If it gets out of the tank, it's less concentrated. So the water hopefully gets to it and it will generate heat, but it will knock it to the ground. The scrubber, the vent gas scrubber, you'd have those droplets at a controlled rate. It would produce some heat, but you wouldn't get a runaway heat reaction, as in the case where it's all contained in that vessel. There was a refrigeration system to help with the heat runaway, but they shut that down to save money, and they shipped that Freon, which is the coolant, to other plants. As a result, somewhere between 2,000 and 8,000 people were killed. Carbide said at the time it was 3,800 people. Municipal workers who had to take the bodies out said there were 15,000 people. So somewhere in between. We estimate that 500,000 of people were exposed, 350,000 people were injured, and 100,000 people with permanent disabilities. Now, why, in this case, were those numbers so high? This is an overview of where the chemical plant is. If you see all this green here, this is where the plant is. Now look around the plant gate. Do you see all this? Where do you think the cheapest place to live is? The cheapest rent? The cheapest place to live is where nobody else wants to live. Where does nobody else wants to live? Around a chemical plant. So you had a abnormally high concentration of people around this chemical plant. Here's some of the aftermath. So things that we talked about over and over and over and over again. It was during the winter. People were using fuel to heat up their homes. Dense populations. That makes sense. The more people you have, the more people get affected. If this happened in Iowa, you wouldn't have concentrated populations. Heavy industrialization. We talked about the steel mills, the coke plants, the zinc manufacturers, the power plants. Often in valleys, we showed the mountains that would trap in all that air. Temperature inversion, once again, that keeps the air from being less dilute and going downwind. Stagnant air, so if it can go up and there's mountains around it, it's stuck there. And once it's stuck there, it gets more and more and more concentrated. And it's caused by accidents sometimes, or mixtures from non-accidents. I hope that you've enjoyed this video. Thanks for your time. Good day.